What's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel for the next episode on this 2015 Ford Police Interceptor Sedan. So before we get to it, if you like Chevelles, wagons, step vans, rat rods, Bentleys, Fiats, or anything else out of the ordinary, then consider clicking that subscribe button because this just might be the channel for you. In the previous video on this Police Interceptor Sedan, we did a walk around of the main car and the parts car, and we talked about the damage that was done to the main car and the repairs that needed to be made. So today we're going to start the repairs, get it off the rollback, and see if we can get this thing ready to hit the road once again. Well, it's time to start repair to the main car, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to repair this thing while it's sitting on the rollback. So I'm going to jack this thing up, tear out our bad suspension components, put all of our good suspension components from the parts car, and we should be able to drive this thing off. Now you can see really all we need to replace is the CV axle and the lower control arm and the wheel and tire, which we obviously have on the parts car. So let's go ahead and start tearing this down and getting it ready for the new parts. And here are all the damaged parts off of the car. Now everything came off pretty easily except for the bolt that was in here on the lower control arm. That gave me a little bit of fit, but I think that's because it had Loctite on it. And we did discover that the inner fender is no longer any good, which is fine because we have one in the parts car. And looking at the car here, we have no other damage except for a bracket here on the fender, and we do have that on the parts car, so that's good. We'll just have to put this thing together, and if we have an alignment issue, we'll change out that strut. So now that we have all our bad parts removed, we can go to the parts car, get the good parts that we need, and move them over to this car. Everything's ready. Let's remove some parts. So we have all of our replacement parts off, and the only thing that gave me a little bit of fit was the CV axle. It was on there kind of tight, but everything else came off pretty easily. So the only thing that's not good is here on the CV axle, the CV boot is busted. It is leaking grease. So we will replace this in the future, but for right now we're going to use it to get the car off of the rollback. We're going to eventually have to tear most of that stuff down anyway so we can redo the brakes. It's going to need it. So we've got our wheel, we've got our CV axle, we've got our lower control arm. We're going to clean all that stuff up before we put it back on the car, and we went ahead and removed the fender so we can go ahead and get it on. Well, I've skipped ahead and I have all the new parts installed, as you can see, and it appears to look pretty good, but we still do have a couple problems. Now if you take a look at this wheel, it is kind of set back a little bit. Now what that tells me is that we have an alignment issue here, and it could be the tie rod end, but I think most of it is the strut. I believe the tabs down on the bottom of the strut are bent. That's causing our wheel to set back a little bit. And I believe the pocket that the control arm in, the lower control arm in the front, I believe it's kind of tweaked a little bit. And I have went ahead and got most of the residue off. Now I'm going to have to buff out some of these areas. As you can see, you can still see the outline of the shield and some of the graphics. That's all going to have to be buffed out at minimum. So now let's concentrate on getting this thing off of the rollback. Well, this thing is finally off of the rollback, and as you can hear, this thing is running. It is super quiet. It runs really good. And this is the very first time that I've heard this thing run in person. The only other time I heard it run was in the auction videos. But you can tell it runs really smooth. It's really quiet. We'll open up the hood here so you can take a better look. And it just purrs right along. So now onto the inside. The AC works excellent in this car. This thing blows snowballs. Now it says 79,463 miles, 13,000 hours. This thing seems to not have any problems. The coolant temperature looks good. We do have a low tire. I believe that's the left front. Of course we have the airbag light on because we got airbags blowed. Not a big deal. The radio seems to work. I haven't really tried out anything else. We can try out our spotlight. Oh man, that's super cool. So I showed that damage on the right front, and I showed where the wheel alignment is not great at all, and I think we've got an issue with the K-member. But I have taken some measurements, and it appears the K-member is actually slid back. So if you look right here at the tree, I got a chain. We're going to do something pretty primitive. I'm actually going to loosen those bolts, and I'm going to pull the K-member back forward. So how about that? If you look at those gaps, that looks really good. We definitely have moved that thing forward about a ½ inch back to where it needs to be. And if you look, the wheel's pretty straight, and the wheel's pretty straight on this side. And if you look at this gap, looks really good too. I want to check the tie rods and the alignment with a toe stick just to be on the safe side, but I think we got it pretty close, and I think we've got it back to where it needs to be. So that was an easy problem solved. I don't believe I have to do anything to the K-member. I think that's going to be okay, but I am going to have to address that strut. That's going to need to be replaced, and the sway bar end link is going to need to be replaced, but I believe everything else is good. So that was a pretty easy fix. So now we know that the K-member is in the correct spot. It's time to replace some parts. Now here is a replacement strut that I took off the parts car and a sway bar end link, and here's a brand new CV axle that's going to replace the one that's in there with the busted boot. So these parts will get our suspension all squared away, and this strut right here should fix any kind of alignment issues that we have, and I'll show you where the other one's bent here and also here where I overlooked it before. Now here's the damaged strut assembly on the car. Now it was hard to tell what kind of damage this thing really had until we got the K-member in the right spot, but as you can see, it definitely does have some issues. Now I did overlook this piece right here. That is bent. The strut rod is bent, and it's also bent right here where it mounts up to the knuckle. And what that's going to do is that's going to actually throw off our caster. That's going to push the wheel back, and when that happens, that throws off your tie rod end, and that's going to throw off your toe. So if we get that strut in there, I think that's going to square away most of our problems with our alignment issues. And while we're repairing all this stuff, we're going to go ahead and get the new CV axle in, so that'll be squared away also. Well, I've got all the suspension tore down. Now take a look at this strut assembly that I pulled off. Now the bad one's right here on the left, and the replacement one's on the right, and you can definitely see all the issues. Now I originally thought this thing just had a bent bracket, but it's actually the body of the strut that's bent. Now, like I stated, this is going to cause all kinds of alignment issues. It's going to cause your caster, your camber, and your toe to be out. And it looks way worse off the car. It really did not look that bad on the car, but as you can see, it is really, really bad. So I think this strut assembly is going to straighten it out. We've got our new link over here we're going to put on, and we're going to go ahead and get that CV axle on. Everything's installed, all the nuts and bolts are torqued down to spec. The next thing is let's get this wheel on here and see how well it looks. And there you have it. It looks way better than it did. We've came a long way from where we started, where that wheel was way back, and I owe it all to replacing all those suspension components. And the wheel seems to be pretty close to spec. Now the toe is still kind of out, so I need to do some work there, but otherwise than that, it looks like it's right where it needs to be. And I've got a pretty easy way to set the toe on this thing. I got a toe stick that I'm going to use, and we'll get these front wheels all lined up so it'll drive nice and straight down the road. Now this is the tool that I'm going to use to set the alignment. Now this is a toe stick, and some of you guys might be familiar with it, some of you guys might not be familiar with it, but it's pretty simple to use. You put this in front of the tire, and it measures from tire to tire in between the tread. So what you want to do is you want to make sure it's zeroed out. And basically you put these little prongs in the tread on both sides and you measure. And then you go to the back side of the tire and take that same measurement from here to there, and you adjust your little wheels here. You unloosen this and slide this back and forth, and this will give you a measurement of how off you are in the front or in the back, and that'll tell you how to do your adjustment. So we know we're off on the passenger side, so the passenger side front tire, the front of the tire needs to actually go in that way. We do know that. So we'll measure the front and see what the difference is between the back of the tire, and then we'll adjust that tie rod end out. So now after measuring, you can see just how much we are off. That's how far we're off in the front. That's how much the front of the tire is sticking out on this side. So if you look down here, we have our gauge zeroed out. I'm going to slide that in until it lines up with this tread pattern here, and then that'll give us our measurement. We take half of that and we move the front half out to that point. Now our toe gauge shows that we are 1 3/8 of an inch out. So we need to figure out what half of that is and move it back to that mark, and then we'll put the toe stick back underneath the car and adjust the tie rod end out until the pointers line up in those tread spots. It's best to do this on a concrete floor, but we don't have that, so we're just going to do it here and it'll be just fine. And we have it set to where it needs to be. Now we need to just put it back underneath the car and adjust out that tie rod end. So the toe is pretty close. Now this is in no way, shape, or form a alternative to a four-wheel alignment, and that will definitely need to be done in the future. But for now, we have the wheels straight and we can take this thing out on the road and at least give it a test drive and see how it does. With the parts repaired and the alignment complete, the next order of business is to take this thing out on the road for a test drive. So until next time when we'll do just that, I would like to say thank you for watching. Be sure to check out all my other videos on all my other projects. Check out my merch store for a lot of wacky t-shirts you can buy and help support this channel. And if you're not subscribed, be sure you click that subscribe button, click the bell so you'll get the notifications, and you can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram.